breaking your back. Most of us believe that is the price of a productive garden, but if the forest thrives without a single shovel, why are we told endless toil is essential? In 1944, Ruth Stout tossed aside her plow, buried her soil in spoiled hay, and watched her harvest improve while the experts scoffed. If effortless soil can outgrow hard labor, what have we been sold by the gardening industry? And what happens if the lazy soil outlives us all? Under the canopy of an old forest, something remarkable happens every day. Leaves drift down, branches fall, and last season's growth melts quietly into the ground. No one turns the earth or pulls a single weed, yet the soil grows richer year after year. This is not a place of struggle or endless labor. It is a place where abundance comes from stillness. The trees reach skyward, ferns unfurl, and wildflowers return in spring, all without anyone breaking their back. Contrast that with the image most gardeners carry, the stooped figure, shovel in hand, sweat running down their brow. Generations have been taught that good soil demands hard work. The plot must be turned, weeds must be conquered, and every inch must be tamed by human effort. If your hands are not blistered and your knees are not sore, it hardly counts as gardening at all. But the forest ignores these rules. It thrives on neglect. Its secret is patience, not muscle. The ground stays covered, never left bare. Every fallen leaf is a gift, feeding the life below. Earthworms tunnel through the darkness, fungi weave their threads, and the soil becomes a living fabric, not a battlefield. This quiet system works for ancient redwoods and tiny violets alike. No fertilizer spreaders, no rototillers, no frantic uprooting of dandelions. Only a constant, gentle layering. Nature's own way of building strength from what others might call waste. So why do we insist on fighting the ground? Why do we believe that only sweat and struggle can yield a harvest? For those with aching backs or tired joints, the answer matters. If the richest soil on earth is born from stillness, maybe the hardest work in gardening is unlearning what we have been told. The forest stands as proof. Sometimes the best thing you can do for the land is to let it be. Spring in Connecticut can be stubborn. In 1944, Ruth Stout stood at the edge of her garden waiting for the plowman who was supposed to break the ground. He was late, again. The days were getting longer, her seeds were ready, but the soil remained untouched. After years of depending on someone else's schedule and feeling every twinge in her back from the seasons before, she decided she'd had enough. She took her seeds, pressed them into the earth as it was, and covered the rows with whatever hay she could find. Spoiled or not, no plow, no turning, no ceremony. Just a quiet act of defiance against the idea that good gardening required pain and machinery. That first season did not deliver perfection. Some crops thrived, others struggled, but something unexpected happened. The ground stayed soft, the weeds did not take over, and the harvest was better than she dared hope. The garden did not punish her for skipping the plow. Instead, it seemed to breathe easier. Ruth kept at it, refining her method, watching as her labor shrank and her yields held steady or improved. She began to wonder why anyone insisted on fighting the soil at all. Neighbors shook their heads. Gardening was supposed to be hard work, but Ruth was stubborn, and she was tired of aching bones. Over the next decade, she perfected her approach. No digging, no hoeing, just a thick, permanent mulch of hay. By the time she published her first book, How to Have a Green Thumb Without an Aching Back, in 1955, Ruth Stout had become a quiet revolutionary. She wrote for gardeners who were aging, busy, or simply tired of pain. Her message was simple. You do not have to suffer to grow food. The soil, left mostly alone and covered with hay, could do the heavy lifting. Her garden became a living argument against the cult of toil, and her story spread far beyond Poverty Hollow. Ruth's experiment was not just about vegetables. It was about reclaiming joy from a system that confused struggle with success. In the years after World War II, American factories that once built tanks and bombers found themselves with a new mission: remaking the backyard. Assembly lines that had powered the war effort now turned out a different kind of machine, a squat, rumbling engine with spinning blades designed to chew through soil instead of steel. The rototiller was born, and with it, a new vision of gardening. Ads promised freedom from blisters and backaches. Magazine spreads showed smiling couples steering their tillers across neat rectangles of earth, the machine's roar standing in for progress itself. Companies like Rototiller Inc. and later Troy Built ramped up production to meet surging demand from a generation eager for modern convenience. By the late 1950s, rototillers were rolling off assembly lines in numbers that would have seemed impossible just a decade before. Tool manufacturers partnered with automakers and seed companies, flooding catalogs and hardware stores with glossy images of power and ease. The tiller became more than a tool. It was a badge of scientific gardening, a symbol of post-war prosperity. Extension agents and garden clubs held field days where the latest models churned up demonstration plots. Each pass promised better yields and less labor. For many, the sound of an engine in spring meant hope and renewal. But as millions of homeowners bought into the promise, the idea of turning soil by hand or not turning it at all started to look old-fashioned, even suspect. The rototiller was now the standard, locking in a cycle of annual disturbance that shaped not just gardens, but the very way people thought about soil. By the late 1940s, the American backyard was becoming a proving ground for modern living. Manufacturers, flush with post-war confidence, saw an opportunity in the new suburbs. The message was clear: progress meant power tools, and gardening was no exception. Advertisements for rototillers filled magazines and hardware store windows, promising to turn the toil of soil into a quick, dignified task. Slogans such as "Science in your soil" and "Garden like a professional" framed tilling as not just a convenience, but a duty for any responsible homeowner. A historian of rural technology said that after the war, the rototiller was marketed as the badge of the modern gardener. If you wanted to keep up with the neighbors, you bought a machine, you tilled your plot, and you showed you were doing things the right way. The industry made sure that not tilling looked like neglect. Extension agents and garden clubs joined in, running public demonstrations where engines chewed through the earth while crowds looked on. Catalogs paired rototillers with the latest seeds and fertilizers, creating a bundle of modernity that made untouched soil look backward. In this new consumer culture, gardening was recast as a task for machines and chemicals, not for patience and observation. The result was a shift in expectations. A well-tended garden now meant rows of freshly turned earth each spring, with the tiller's roar replacing the quiet rhythms of nature. The idea that soil could be left alone, let alone improved by neglect, was quietly erased from the story, replaced by the hum of engines and the promise of progress. Beneath the surface, the soil is alive, with threads finer than any root. These are fungal hyphae, living cables that stretch for yards, linking plant to plant, root to root. They carry water, nutrients, and chemical messages, building a silent network that holds the soil together. In a healthy bed, these filaments knit the ground into aggregates, tiny clusters that trap moisture and feed the life within. But when a steel blade cuts through, everything changes. A single pass of a rototiller or plow slices these hyphae cleanly, breaking the network in thousands of places. The connections that took months, even years to grow, are severed in minutes. What was once a living web becomes a scatter of broken strands. Soil that once clung together in soft, crumbly clumps breaks down into dust. Without the glue of fungal threads, aggregates collapse. Carbon that took years to build up is suddenly exposed to air, fueling a burst of decomposition that escapes as carbon dioxide. The earth loses its structure and its memory. The difference is invisible at first, because freshly tilled ground looks soft, even rich. But underneath, the fiber optic system that powered the ecosystem is gone. The plants above lose their lifeline, forced to fend for themselves. Without the hidden web, roots must reach farther for water and nutrients, and the soil dries out faster, becoming harder and less fertile with each round of disturbance. The cost of this convenience is paid in lost connections, weaker plants, and a soil that must be nursed back to health year after year. A deep layer of mulch does more than just hide the soil. It changes the entire environment at ground level. Under 8 inches of hay, sunlight never touches the earth. Weed seeds used to waiting for a break in the canopy stay dormant. The soil beneath remains cool and moist, even when the air above bakes in summer heat. Scientists measuring evaporation rates under thick organic mulch have found that water loss drops by half or more compared to bare ground. In hot, dry weather, moisture savings can reach toward 90%. That means for most gardeners, the hose stays coiled. The ground under the hay feels damp long after rain has vanished from the forecast. This steady moisture is only part of the story. The mulch also becomes a living invitation to earthworms. Each night, they rise to feed at the surface, dragging bits of decaying hay into the soil. Their tunnels loosen the ground, letting air and water move freely. Over time, their castings enrich the earth, building fertility with no effort from above. Where tillage shreds the soil's living fabric, mulch stitches it back together. The result is a quiet rebound. A web of roots, fungi, and creatures rebuilds the sponge that holds water and nutrients in place. But this system depends on depth. Too little mulch, and weeds slip through. Too thin a layer, and the summer sun finds its way to the soil, undoing the work. Ruth Stout insisted on a full 8 inches for a reason. It is not just a number, it is the difference between a garden that fends for itself and one that demands constant rescue. When the mulch is deep enough, the soil below becomes a lifeline, not a liability. The method is so simple, it almost feels like cheating. There is no digging, no wrestling with stubborn weeds, and no need to drag a hose across the yard. Start by flattening any existing weeds right where they stand. Do not bother pulling them out. Just stomp them down. Next, cover every inch of your garden bed with a thick layer of spoiled hay. Ruth Stout insisted on at least 8 inches, not 6 or 4. Anything less and weeds will find their way through. Spoiled hay is best, since it is often cheaper, breaks down faster, and is less likely to sprout grass. Straw can work too, but it is lower in nutrients and slower to feed the soil. Once the mulch is in place, planting is easy. Simply pull the hay aside, drop your seeds or seedlings onto the bare soil, and then pat the hay back around them. There is no need to water after planting unless you are in the middle of a drought. The mulch keeps moisture locked in, even during the hottest months. After that, walk away. There is no routine weeding, no turning the soil, no hauling compost. The hay does the heavy lifting, acting as a weed barrier, a sponge for rain, and a slow-release fertilizer, all in one. The hardest part is trusting that less really is more. Not all hay is created equal. In the past 2 decades, a new threat has crept into the mulch pile, one that can wipe out a garden for years, no matter how carefully you follow the steps. Aminopyralid, sold under names like Grazin and Milestone, is a powerful herbicide sprayed on pastures and hayfields to kill broadleaf weeds. It does not break down in the field, and it does not break down in a cow's stomach or in the compost pile. Residues can linger in hay, straw, or manure for several seasons, invisible and odorless. Gardeners across the US and UK have watched their tomatoes, beans, and potatoes twist and shrivel after using contaminated mulch, sometimes even after composting it for a year or more. The damage is not subtle. Leaves curl, stems corkscrew, and growth grinds to a halt. Extension offices now warn that a single bale of tainted hay can ruin an entire year's harvest. The only way to be sure your mulch is safe is to test it yourself. Take a handful of the hay or compost you plan to use, mix it with clean potting soil, and plant a few pea or bean seeds in a pot. Put another pot beside it with just clean soil. Water and wait for 3 to 6 weeks. If the seedlings in the test pot come up twisted or stunted, while the control pot looks healthy, your hay is contaminated. Do not use it. If both pots grow straight and strong, your mulch is likely safe. When in doubt, ask your hay supplier directly about herbicide use, and remember that weed-free does not mean chemical-free. A little caution at the start can save you a season's worth of effort and heartbreak. Skepticism is part of every new idea, especially when it promises to make hard work vanish. Some gardeners worry that a thick layer of hay will turn their plot into a haven for mice or slugs. Others glance at the tangled mulch and wonder if their neighbors will think they've given up. But for every concern, there's a garden quietly thriving behind the doubts. Martha Evans, 74, had nearly given up on her backyard beds after a second knee surgery. She says, "I thought I'd have to quit. Then I tried the Stout method, just hay, no digging. Now I can tend my beans and tomatoes without ever bending to pull a weed. My back does not hurt, and I have not bought fertilizer in years." Rodents and slugs? Martha keeps the mulch a few inches from the stems and lets her cat patrol the edges. Messiness? She says, "It looks wild, but that wildness is what keeps the soil alive." Some worry the hay will steal nitrogen or that yields will drop. But gardeners like Martha find their harvests match or even outpace the old tilled plots without the endless cycle of watering and weeding. For those who once saw gardening as a test of endurance, the greatest surprise is how much more they can grow when they finally stop fighting the land. Every year, millions of gardeners still reach for the tiller. Beneath their feet, the soil's living networks quietly repair or collapse. As droughts intensify and chemical residues threaten our food, the real revolution is happening just under a blanket of mulch. Sometimes the smartest work is letting nature do what it has perfected for millennia. The question now is not how hard you work, but whether you are willing to trust the soil.